the timeless past.
The city of the sun's horizon. The first thing Kale noticed about the city of Akhenaten was the silence. It was not the silence of peace, but the hollow, listening silence of a temple where the gods had been exorcised. Here in this jewel box of a city carved from the virgin desert, there were no towering statues of Ammon with his hidden face, no menacing figures of Sobek, the crocodile, no jackal-headed Anubis standing sentinel over the dead. There was only the Aten, the sun disk, its rays terminating in delicate hands that offered the Ankh, the key of life, to the royal family. It was a beautiful, pure, and deeply unsettling doctrine. As captain of the pharaoh's Guard, Kel's duty was not to question, but to protect. Yet in the quiet watches of the night, standing guard outside the doors of the great palace, questions were all he had. He was a son of Thebes, raised in the shadow of Karnak's splendor. He had prayed to Osiris for his father's safe passage to the field of reeds, and given thanks to Horus for his own strength in battle. Now his king, his living god, told him those deities were nothing more than shadows and lies. Akhenaten, the pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, was a man possessed. Kale saw it every day. The king was tall and strangely formed, with an elongated skull, a drooping jaw, and a swollen belly that artists were commanded to render with unflinching, almost grotesque realism. But it was his eyes that held the true story. They burned with a feverish intensity, a mixture of ecstatic vision and profound soul-deep terror. He would spend days fasting in the great Aten temple, a magnificent open-air structure that eschewed the dark, secretive sanctuaries of the old religion. He would sing hymns to the sun disk in a high, wavering voice, hymns of such beauty they could make a warrior weep. Then, in the privacy of his chambers, Kale would hear him not singing, but smashing pottery, his voice a low, agonized roar of not enough, it is not enough. His queen, the impossibly beautiful Nefertiti, was his anchor. Where Akhenaten was fire and frenzy, she was cool river stone. Her official title was Great Royal Wife, but Kale knew she was his co-conspirator. He saw how she managed the court, soothed the ruffled feathers of foreign envoys, bewildered by the new religion, and calmed her husband with a single touch of her hand on his arm. It was she who had promoted Kale, seeing in his unwavering loyalty a tool more valuable than 1,000 pious men. "My husband sees the world as it is, Captain," she had told him once, her dark, coal-lined eyes searching his, "not as the priests of Ammon would have us see it. It is a blinding light to those accustomed to darkness. Your faith is in the man, the pharaoh. That is enough. Protect him from the shadows." The shadows were gathering. Kale saw the whispers among the servants, the resentful glances from the courtiers who missed the wealth and power of the old capital. He foiled 2 attempts on the pharaoh's life in the first year at Akhenaten, poisoned fig, a venomous asp left in his bedchamber. They were clumsy, desperate acts, but they were growing bolder. The agents were always Thebans, men whose faces were etched with the symbols of the old gods, their tongues cut out to prevent interrogation. They were zealots, sent by the one man Akhenaten feared more than any god, Pacer, the high priest of Amarna, the spider sitting in his web at Karnak, growing fat on the offerings that no longer came. The conflict in Kel's soul was a silent war. He found himself tracing the faded tattoo of the Eye of Horus on his forearm, a ward against evil his mother had insisted upon when he joined the Guard. Was this protection now a mark of heresy? He watched the royal family, Akhenaten and Nefertiti, their 6 daughters, in the sunken gardens, laughing as they played with the young prince Tutankhamun. They looked like any family, but Kale knew they slept in a fortress, besieged by an entire culture, by millennia of belief. One evening the crisis arrived. Kale was making his final rounds when he noticed a flicker of movement near the window of the prince's chambers. It was a sinuous shadow, too fluid for a man. He moved silently, his bronze koppish drawn. Inside, a cloaked figure stood over the sleeping boy's bed, a slender, dark-metal dagger raised high. Kale didn't hesitate. He burst through the door, his shoulders slamming into the assassin, sending them both tumbling to the floor. The dagger clattered away. The assassin was inhumanly strong, twisting in his grasp, but Kale was a Medjay, born of the desert. He drove his own blade into the man's heart. As the assassin choked out his last breath, Akhenaten and Nefertiti rushed in. The pharaoh looked at the dead man, then at his terrified, crying son, and finally at Kale. The fever in his eyes was replaced by a look of stark, cold decision. "The time for secrets is over," Akhenaten said, his voice low and firm. "Kale, you have saved the future. Now, you must learn what it is you are truly fighting for." The chamber of blasphemy, Akhenaten, did not lead him to a royal audience hall or a grand library. He led him, with Nefertiti at his side, to the great temple of the Aten. But they did not stop in the sun-drenched main court. The pharaoh pressed a sequence of carved sun discs on a seemingly solid wall. With a low grinding of hidden mechanisms, a section of the floor descended, revealing a dark, narrow staircase spiraling down into the earth. The air that rose from it was ancient and cold, carrying a smell of dust and decay that had no place in this new city. "Only we three, and the architect who is now with the dust of the desert, know of this place," Nefertiti whispered, her usual composure strained. "What you see, you must carry to your tomb." They descended for what felt like an eternity. The torches they carried cast dancing, monstrous shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Finally, they emerged into a small, circular chamber. The room was an act of supreme blasphemy. The walls were covered in hieroglyphs, but they were twisted, nightmarish perversions of the sacred writings. Here was Osiris, but not as the noble king of the underworld. He was depicted as a monstrous entity with a gaping maw, devouring a procession of weeping souls. Anubis was not guiding the dead. He was herding them like cattle into pens of fire. Amun-Ra was a bloated, sightless creature whose hidden face was a vortex of screaming mouths. Kale felt a wave of nausea and sacrilegious terror. This was a place of madness, my lord pharaoh. "What is this?" he stammered. Akhenaten's elongated face was pale in the torchlight. "The truth, Captain. The truth I stole from the deepest, most forbidden vault in the temple of Karnak, a place not even the high priest knows exists. This is the gods as they truly are." He gestured to a stone pedestal in the center of the room. Upon it lay a single, dark papyrus scroll, bound not with leather, but with what looked like dried sinew. It seemed to absorb the light around it. "This is the Amtuat, the book of what is in the underworld. But it is not the version the priests give us. This is the original, the unedited version." With trembling hands, Akhenaten unrolled the scroll. The hieroglyphs within seemed to writhe, written in an ink the color of dried blood. "We have been taught that our souls, our Ka and Ba, journey to the Duat for judgment," the pharaoh began, his voice barely a whisper. "We are weighed against the feather of Mat. If we are worthy, we pass into the field of reeds, an eternal paradise." He let out a harsh, barking laugh that echoed horribly in the chamber. "A lie, a beautiful, comforting, and utterly soul-destroying lie. There is no judgment. There is only a harvest." He pointed to a horrifying vignette on the scroll. It showed the scales of judgment, but the heart was not being weighed against a feather. It was being thrown into the jaws of Ammit, the devourer of the dead, while Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe, simply made a mark, like a vintner counting his casks. "The gods of Egypt are not our creators or our shepherds," Akhenaten said, his voice cracking with emotion. "They are parasites. Ancient, powerful, and eternally hungry. They did not create us. They found us. They cultivated us. This entire civilization, our rituals, our prayers, our monumental tombs, it is all a farm. An elaborate system for the cultivation and harvesting of spiritual energy. The life force, the Ka." Kale stared, his mind refusing to process the words. "No, it cannot be. ... Think, Kale." Akhenaten pressed, grabbing his arm. "Why do the gods demand such constant worship? Why such elaborate, blood-soaked rituals? It is not for glory. It is for sustenance. They feed on our devotion. They feed on the offerings. And their greatest feast is the afterlife. The Book of the Dead, which every good Egyptian is buried with, is not a guide to paradise. It is a user's manual written by the predators themselves, a map that leads the soul directly into their gullets. The field of reeds isn't heaven, Kale. It's the fattening pen before the slaughter. He was panting, sweat beading on his brow. Nefertiti placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "My husband discovered this when he was but a prince at Thebes," she said, her voice grim. "He found the entrance to this vault by accident. What he read drove him to the edge of madness, until he realized what he had to do." Akhenaten pointed to the ceiling of the chamber, where a single symbol was carved. The Aten, the sun disk, with its rays reaching down. "That is the only truth, the sun. It is a great fire in the sky, gives life, warmth, and asks for nothing in return. It is impartial, shines on the believer and the blasphemer alike. It has no hunger, it has no ego, it simply is. My revolution, Kale, is not about religion. It is an act of rebellion. I am trying to liberate humanity. I am trying to starve the parasites." The scale of the revelation was too vast, too monstrous. Kel's entire world, his faith, the memory of his ancestors, the very meaning of his existence, crumbled into dust. He thought of his father, buried with such care, his tomb filled with the spells and prayers meant to guide him. He had not guided him to paradise, he had guided him to the feast. Kel fell to his knees, the koppish slipping from his grasp, and retched onto the cold stone floor. He was the guard of a heretic who was not a heretic at all, but the only sane man in a world of blissful livestock. By destroying the old gods, by erasing their names and closing their temples, I am cutting off their food supply, Akhenaten continued, his voice softer now. By directing all worship to the one true, impartial power, I hoped to break their hold. But they are ancient and cunning. Their agents, their priests, fight back. They will not let their flock escape. Kale looked up, his eyes streaming with tears. Then ... we are at war. We have always been at war, Akhenaten said grimly. But only one side knew it. The long shadow of Thebes, the revelation changed everything. Kel's duty was no longer just to a man, but to a cause so profound it defied comprehension. He saw the world through new eyes. The daily hymns to the Aten were no longer strange rituals, but acts of war. The smiling faces of the courtiers concealed the blissful ignorance of the condemned. And the shadow of Pacer, the high priest in Thebes, became the shadow of the chief zookeeper, desperate to wrangle his escaping animals. Kel's vigilance became legendary. He became the pharaoh's shadow, tasting every meal, inspecting every gift, sleeping across the threshold of his door. But the enemy was more subtle than he could have imagined. They did not try to use daggers again. They used time. The pharaoh, once so vibrant despite his strange physique, began to tire easily. A persistent cough racked his body. His skin took on a grayish pallor, and the fire in his eyes dimmed to a feverish ember. The court physicians were useless, offering prayers and poultices that did nothing. "It is poison," Nefertiti said to Kale one night, her voice stripped of all hope. "A slow poison, something from the swamps of the delta, something that mimics natural disease. Pacer is patient. He knows he cannot make a martyr of the pharaoh. He will simply let him wither, so that his death appears a judgment from the abandoned gods." The war was lost. Kale could feel it. The city of Akhenaten, once a beacon of hope, began to feel like a tomb. The great project was failing. Without the pharaoh's driving will, the people were growing restless.
Yes.
Whispers of the old gods were returning, spoken in secret, in the dead of night. Nefertiti, ever the strategist, knew they needed a contingency. One moonless night, she summoned Kale to her private chambers. Her face was a mask of cold resolve, but her eyes betrayed her heartbreak. Laid out on a table were several scrolls copies of the blasphemous texts from the hidden chamber. "Akhenaten will not survive the year," she said bluntly. "When he dies, Pacer will come for my son. He will undo everything. He will put the shackles back on the minds of men. I cannot let this truth die with us." She pushed one of the scrolls towards Kale. "This is the most potent of them. The true history of their arrival, their pacts with the earliest kings. The rest I will take with me." "Take with you where, my queen?" Kale asked. "Into the desert," she said. "The world believes I am a queen. I will become a ghost. They will say, I fell from favor or died of plague. Let them. I will take our daughter Ankhesenpatan and the knowledge. We will preserve it in the hopes that one day the world will be ready to listen. But you, Kale, must stay. You must swear an oath to me." She looked at him, her gaze piercing. "Swear on the life that Aten gives you that you will protect Tutankhamun. You will be his shield." Pacer will try to twist him, to use him as a puppet to legitimize the restoration. Do not let the boy's soul be devoured. He is a man. When he is strong enough, tell him the truth of his father. Tell him what you saw in the chamber below. Swear it. Kale knelt and swore the oath, his heart a cold stone in his chest. A week later, the great royal wife Nefertiti and the princess Akhenaten vanished from the palace. The official story was a sudden, virulent plague. The court was plunged into mourning, but Kale knew he had witnessed not a death, but the escape of hope into the wilderness. Akhenaten faded quickly after she left. His last days were spent in a delirium, raving not at the gods, but at his own failure. On his deathbed, he clutched Kel's hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Protect the boy," the pharaoh rasped, his last breath a sigh of dust and defeat. The flock, must not, return to the pen. Then he was gone. The heretic king was dead. And in the silence of the death chamber, Kale could almost hear the triumphant laughter of the gods in Thebes. The zookeeper's triumph, the death of Akhenaten, shattered the city. Order collapsed into chaos. The court factions, held in check only by the pharaoh's will, turned on each other. And into this vacuum, like a carrion bird sensing a kill, came Pacer. The high priest of Amarna arrived, not with an army, but with an aura of absolute authority. He was an old man, thin and wiry, but his eyes held the weight of centuries. He moved through the panicked court of Akhenaten with a calm, predatory grace. He paid his respects to the dead pharaoh with a display of magnanimous sorrow that made Kale's stomach turn. Then he went straight to the 9-year-old prince, Tutankhamun. Kale stood guard, his hand on his koppish, every instinct screaming to cut the old priest down. But his oath to Nefertiti held him back. He was to be a shield, not an assassin. He watched in impotent fury as Pacer knelt before the boy, his voice a soothing, grandfatherly balm. "Your father was a great man, my prince," Pacer said, his words dripping with false sincerity. "But he was led astray by a terrible vision. He was ill. The gods are merciful. They forgive. They wish only to welcome you and all of Egypt back into their loving embrace." It was a masterclass in manipulation. In a month, the court had abandoned Akhenaten, leaving it to the wind and sand. They returned to Thebes in a grand procession. The city erupted in celebration. Temples of Amen were reopened, their coffers filled with the donations of a grateful populace. The boy, Prince Tutankhamun, heir of the Aten, was rechristened Tutankhamun, the living image of Amen. The great heresy was over. The restoration had begun. For Kale, it was hell. He remained captain of the guard, his oath forcing him to watch the dismantling of everything Akhenaten had fought for. He stood guard as the young Tutankhamun, prompted by Pacer, issued edicts that restored the old cults. He watched as artisans once praised for their realism were now commissioned to carve the old familiar lies into stone. Worst of all were the nights. The air in Thebes was thick with a psychic energy. He could now recognize the cloying, sweet stench of a grand feast. The gods were dining well again. He tried to keep his promise. He would find moments to speak with the young king, to tell him stories of his father's bravery, of his mother's wisdom. But Pacer was always there, a serpent in the garden, turning Akhenaten's memory into a cautionary tale of madness and chaos. The boy, wanting only to be loved and to see his kingdom at peace, embraced the role he was given. The final confrontation came years later. Kale, now a man weathered by grief and a terrible secret knowledge, sought out Pacer in the heart of his power, the great hypostyle hall of the Temple of Karnak. The high priest stood before the sanctuary, the colossal columns soaring into the darkness like the legs of impossible beasts. "You knew," Kale said, his voice flat. "All this time, you knew he was right." Pacer turned, his face unreadable in the gloom. "Right, Captain, there is no right. There is only order and chaos." "Your heretic king chose chaos?" "He chose freedom," Kale snarled. "He tried to free us from you, from them. You are cannibals, feasting on the souls of your own people." A thin smile touched Pacer's lips. It was the most terrifying expression Kale had ever seen. Cannibals is such a crude word. "We are... symbionts. We have a covenant. They give us meaning. They give us divine order. They give us comfort against the terror of oblivion. They give us an eternal life. They give us a slaughterhouse. A matter of perspective, Pacer said calmly. What did your Akhenaten offer in return? Cold, indifferent sun in an empty sky? A world without magic, without mystery, without a final paradise to strive for? He would have plunged humanity into a despair from which it would never recover. He saw the truth. Yes, I will grant him that. But he was a fool who did not understand it. He wanted to burn down the pasture because he learned the shepherd eats some of the sheep. I prefer to keep the flock safe, warm, and productive. The monstrous, casual pragmatism of the statement stole the air from Kel's lungs. He finally understood. Pacer and the priesthood were not ignorant or deceived. They were collaborators. They were complicit. So you are their servant, Kale whispered in horror. Pacer's smile widened. Do not be so naive, Captain. We are not their servants. We are their zookeepers. And the flock, he said, gesturing to the temple, to the city, to all of Egypt, must be returned to the pen. There was nothing left to say. Kale was a man marked for death, the last living witness to the truth. He turned and fled Karnak, fleeing Thebes, fleeing the entire cursed land of Egypt. He became a ghost, just as Nefertiti had, melting into the vastness of the desert. Clutching the single scroll, she had given him a testament to a failed war, a forgotten truth. He lived the rest of his days as a hermit, a madman who would stare at the sun and weep. Forever haunted by the zookeeper's smile. Epilogue: The Valley of the Kings. 1922 CE. The air in the tomb was thick with the dust of 32 centuries. Howard Carter, his face slick with sweat, held a candle through the small hole he had made in the doorway. The flame danced, casting flickering light on the treasures within. Can you see anything? Lord Carnarvon asked, his voice trembling with anticipation from behind him. Carter was speechless for a moment, his mind reeling from the glitter of gold, the strange shapes of animal-headed couches, the sentinel statues. He saw not just wealth, but a desperate, frantic abundance. It was the tomb of a boy king who had died young, yet it was stuffed to the gills with more treasure than any pharaoh before him. It was an offering of immense, almost fearful proportion. It was a final lavish payment, a delivery to the masters of the Duat, ensuring the Ka of Tutankhamun arrived safely, accounted for and ready for the feast.